Hello, and welcome to Encounters with Polish Literature, brought to you by the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. I'm David Goldfarb, and I'll be your host. Today's episode is part two of our discussion about the vibrant Polish school of reportage, long-form journalism or creative nonfiction, if you will. If you missed the first part of the discussion, you can go down to the YouTube description below and click the link for the playlist. Go back to episode 10, Reportage, Kapuściński, Szejnert, Grzebałkowska, where I introduced the genre by connecting to some of our discussion about psychological realist novelist Zofia Naukowska in episode 7, and by looking briefly at two of the pioneers of 20th century reportage, Melchior Wańkowicz and Ryszard Kapuściński. And then we moved to an in-depth discussion with Professor Beth Holmgren from Duke University about Małgorzata Szejnert, author of a book recently translated into English by Sean Bai about Ellis Island. Szejnert, as an editor, is an important transitional figure between Kapuściński's generation and the contemporary school of reportage, so we also consider one of the writers she mentored, Magdalena Grzebałkowska, author of 1945, War and Peace, about how World War II ended, or didn't exactly end, in Poland when the German army was forced out. Today, following Professor Holmgren's line of inquiry, we'll be looking at Filip Springer and Katarzyna Boni, authors of two works of reportage that discuss towns that disappear, one slowly over decades in Poland and one suddenly in Japan following the Fukushima disaster in 2011. And both stories involve the immediate and long-term consequences of radiation, which has an interesting effect on the literary form. Before we meet today's guest, I'd like to thank everyone who has been following along with Encounters with Polish Literature and to welcome all the new viewers who joined us for our last episode about Nobel Prize-winning novelist Olga Tokarczuk, making it our most watched episode yet. If you like what you hear on this program, click the thumbs up down below. Ring the bell to get notifications about new episodes. Follow the playlist of all of our episodes in the YouTube description of the program, and leave a comment if you can. And please click the subscribe button to show the Polish Cultural Institute, New York, that you are interested and would like to hear more about Polish literature, its past and present, here on Encounters with Polish Literature. Beth Holmgren, Professor of Polish Studies and Russian Studies at Duke University, has published widely on Polish literature, theory, and popular culture, and film, on Russian literature, film, and women's studies, and on Russian and Polish artists and performers in the North American diaspora. Her recent book, Warsaw is My Country, is a cultural biography of Krystyna Biezińska, an acculturated Jewish Varsovian who served as a 16-year-old orderly in the 1944 Warsaw Uprising. Holmgren's most recent book, co-authored with Professor Helena Gościuło from The Ohio State University, is Polish Cinema Today, a bold new era in film, which explores the reflorescence and great thematic diversification of Polish film in this century. A few of her other books that I happen to have on my shelf are Rewriting Capitalism, Literature and the Market in Late Tsarist Russia and in the Kingdom of Poland, which has a fascinating discussion of Bolesław Prus's novel The Doll, which I'd like to cover at some point on Encounters with Polish Literature. Also, Starring Madame Modjeska, a tour in Poland and America, about the great actress Helena Modjeska. And I'll also mention another anthology edited with Professor Helena Gościuło from The Ohio State University, Russia, Women, Culture, about women in literature, theater, and other areas of culture in 19th and 20th century Russia. Welcome back, Beth.
Thank you very much, David. It's good to be back.
It's great to have you back here. So let's start with Filip Springer and his History of a Disappearance, the story of a forgotten Polish town, which in Polish is simply called by the name of the town, Miedzianka, which is in southwestern Poland, in Silesia, very close to the Kłodzko Valley, which we discussed in the last episode. It's where Olga Tokarczuk sets at least three of her novels. Near the Czech border, also near the town of Karpacz, where Tadeusz Różewicz is buried, and which we discussed in that issue.
I think that one of the reasons that Filip Springer was so interested in this is, first of all, he was somebody who was educated in Poznań, so he received his degree from Adam Mickiewicz University, and I think he am assuming that he grew up in what were called the recovered territories, that they were once German and then they became Polish after the war. And he became interested. There were various articles about Miedzianka, which was originally under the Germans called Kupferberg. And Kupferberg had a long history from, really from the 12th century on, because it was a place that was very rich in ore, of different kinds of ore, silver and copper, et cetera. And he was interested in this town that no longer existed. I mean, it disappeared off the face of the earth. And he was interested in it, I think, because it was under both German, I don't want to say German occupation, but it was in Germany. And then, as I mentioned with the Grzebalkowska work, the War and Peace, this was a town that changed hands, that became part of Poland under the new treaties after 1945. So he is looking at Kupferberg, which quite charms him. And it's a German town that in many ways escapes the worst of the Nazification and any kind of connection with the worst of what the Reich had to dish out. But then he was also very interested in the people that he met who were from Miedzianka and whom he met where they lived in their block in Zabobrze, in Jelenia Góra. So he's very interested in the German side and the Polish side.
Yeah, the story begins in the 12th century with a kind of Cain and Abel tale, right? That the legend of two brothers who get in a fight, and then as a memorial to this event, there are two stone crosses that become a leitmotif in the story, one of which says memento, I remember, or remember, and keeps returning, and it becomes kind of a structural element in the book, I think.
What I find very interesting is that he starts the book, which again, it's Kupferberg, and for many Germans, that it will always be Kupferberg, and it was well known as a very affordable town that was like a spa, but didn't have a spa, but it was in a beautiful spot in the midst of different mountain ranges. And so he's talking about really, really exceptionally the way in which it disappears from the face of the earth, as if it's falling into hell or falling into the underworld. I mean, so he starts with this great hook, what's translated into English by the wonderful Sean Gasper By, who's a great translator. The ground caves in for the first time under the building housing Preuss's smithy and Ryman the merchants. It leaves a crater so large a wagon could fit inside. A crack in the walls has also opened along a row of houses, from Flab the bakers to Frieb the hairdressers, caused by the collapse of a mining drift. One day, the horses plowing Mr. Fransky's field sink into the ground up to their chests and let out such a terrifying howl that those in the immediate vicinity drop what they're doing and race to the field, their faces pale. Only a few are brave enough to come to the animals' aid and rescue them. The rest gaze from a distance at the horses' heads protruding from the earth and the extraordinary funnel-shaped cavity around them.
I read it as kind of a labor history, I mean, it's very much, like economic history. It's about, the fate of the town. And when there's employment, the town is prosperous. And when there isn't, it's like the beginning of yet another disappearance, right? I mean, there are these various moments. It's a little like Tokarczuk's town of Prawiek, Primeval, in Primeval and other times, where, it seems like it's staying in one place. Those two crosses keep coming back. But history is moving around it, I mean, history doesn't really care very much about it. We go through the 30 Years' War in the 17th century. There's a fire caused by a vigorously burning pork roast that destroys nearly, like a third of the town or something like that in 1824. And yet, so the town kind of comes and goes. I mean, that's how it, that's how it seemed to me.
I don't know that I would agree with you about it being a labor history, but I do think that he likes to think of it as a chronicle. He talks about the chronicles, and it's interesting that his style is much more let me give you the history of this town. We can talk about different elements that might seem almost eternal, or some sort of, condemnation that has been put on the town, and it comes and goes. But he's basically, he wants to give us the background. And what's very important is that his tone changes once he can get into real sources, into sources that are written by individuals. So he has the unpublished manuscript of Georg Fransky, who was a brewer. And I see the pattern in this book as the brewery is the through line. The brewery makes good. And then underneath, the ore is really problematic, because the ore that is being taken weakens the town's foundation. But the real foundation is the brewery, and the brewery is never really dismantled until they say it has to be dismantled. But it isn't going to fall through the earth. So that's how I see it. And once he has that information from Fransky, and he can talk about, I think for him, it is, there's a kind of enchantment for him about this town. And I wanted to talk about the one place where he steps forward as a first person narrator, as someone who's receiving totems of this town. He's receiving basically a bottle of beer, but without any beer. And this is called The Bottle. And he says, I got the bottle stopper from Zbigniew Pawęska at the end of our conversation. The whole time he'd been playing with it, turning it over in his fingers, delicately tapping it on the tabletop right next to the microphone. So I had to wonder if he wasn't doing it on purpose. Finally, he said it was for me, and I feigned surprise and for a moment tried politely to refuse. I asked him where he'd gotten it. I just have it, he said. Then he assured me right away that for him, it was no sacrifice or offering. I'll find another one just like it. And so the stopper, too old to treat as ordinary trash, too modern to consider a museum piece. A porcelain lump with a red enamel inscription, Kupferberger Brauerei, G. Fransky. No date, nothing else. The O-ring is already ruined, same with the wire bail, the remains of which are still inside the hole that runs through the middle. And then later he finds a bottle. And once more, that presumptuous symbolism, which I struggle to resist, a whisper of history, as though Green Kupferberg, a town which no longer exists, is mocking me and flinging trash at me, with which I am meant to patch together a history. So he feels somewhat ordained by this bottle. Attempting to understand, this is all I can get my hands on. First, a porcelain bottle stopper, and now a bottle from Fransky's brewery. And so you could say, I have a full set. Though to add insult to injury, the bottleneck is broken in a way that prevents me from celebrating the right of fitting the two together and getting ridiculously excited about it. Maybe the bottle ended up there because someone decided it was the perfect place to throw away the trash left in every house once the Germans had gone. After all, they weren't able to clean up after themselves. Now it has no meaning because all the sentimentality, all my adoration for these two objects is a result of what's above and beyond them, of what I know about the town. But this is all that's remained of the town, of Green Kupferberg. So that's how I justify getting excited at being a homegrown archaeologist.
I also marked that scene in my copy of the book that it reminded me of the thing in Bruno Schulz, like the advertisement of the hair tonic of Anna Chilag, this meaningless thing, presumably, or this piece of thrown away trash that becomes invested with meaning. That Schultz says, the poet has to restore these connections between these trash objects and their stories, their mythology, really.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. But he's not going to go into mythology. He wants somehow to encapsulate, and what I find very interesting, because Springer is an avid follower of architecture. And he's written 6 books since this one. He's a remarkably prolific young writer. He was born in 1982, so he's only 39. So he has 7 books to his credit, maybe more. But so much of his work on Polish architecture is talking about the ways in which in the last period, that's like the 20th and 21st century, it has become ugly, and all the things that he would want to fix. Though he does have a shout out to architects who had wonderful ideas, but he's obsessed with the brzydologia, or the uglification of Poland. And what's fascinating to me is the one town that captures his fancy and enchants him and makes him into an archaeologist rather than an architecture specialist is a town that disappears. A town that's no longer visible. And all he can do is see it in picture photographs. Those are the things, those ephemera is what he wants.
It's interesting the way you talk about, the change in tone in the work, because what I thought was going on there was that it felt to me like the first half of it was like a novel. It reads like a novel, but all the time we're thinking, well, this is nonfiction, right? So where's he getting the dialogue from? Where's the, all this detail how does he know any of that? And then it's like the second half is sort of like the denouement, right? Where we get, we find out what the sources are. We find out that he's been interviewing Mrs. Schuta, the manager the town manager whom everybody hates. They think she's working for the Russians or something like that. Or Karl-Heinz Friebe, and he's looking at the memoir of Dora Puschmann. That they're all those, and then that becomes its own thing, right? I mean, this revelation of the sources that that makes the town real in some way.
Yes, and I think that the sources very much shape what he does, how he narrates this, because in the beginning he is talking about going from the 12th century, talking about all the various rich people or people who are mining specialists who are looking at Kupferberg and getting silver and copper out of it, never quite getting enough, but they keep on looking at it with envy and desire. And then once he gets into the late 19th century and into the 20th century, he has, again, a boy who is enchanted, whom he can follow. So that's Georg Franzke, who ends up being a brewer. And what better thing, it's a very plebeian thing, but he makes Kupferberger gold, which is the thing that truly puts its stamp on the town. And Kupferberger gold goes everywhere in Germany and even beyond Germany. It's sold because it is such a wonderful tasting beer because of the water and the way it is brewed. And that is a constant. And he talks about Franzke learning to hunt. He talks about how he loves nature. He learns about brewing, all of those things. And that's very important for him. And then later on, it changes, the narrative changes because he's able to interview living people. And so you have Karl-Heinz Friebe, who becomes a source for him, even though Karl-Heinz has left when he's 4 or 5, because he's being evacuated as a German who lives in what are now recovered territories for the Poles, and he leaves. But later on, he can interview Karl-Heinz Friebe, who comes back to this place that he barely knows as this idol of his childhood. So there is that in this. But then as the narrative moves on, we move into the shift in who lives in Kupferberg. It's no longer Kupferberg. The Red Army has swept through and had, dealt out its own kind of destruction, raping women and also taking things, etc. And also
but before we get to that, there's that great moment, which I think was like the shining community moment of the novel, which is when
it's not a novel. It's not a novel.
Sorry. That's my mistake. The shining community moment of the work of Reportage. Even I make that mistake sometimes. Which is when the Nazis are on the run. And if I could just read that, because I thought that was like a fantastic moment where
Sure.
where they're they realize that they're losing, and the mayor of the town decides that well, we don't have to observe these Nazi rules anymore, even though these are Germans, right? I mean, they are ethnic Germans, and they've been part of Germany their entire life. But the mayor says, here's the passage. The mayor appeals for everyone to stay calm and reasonable until the war ends, and he abolishes the requirement for them to greet one another with the Nazi salute. When he returns to his office, an officer of the Waffen-SS division currently stationed in Kupferberg is already waiting for him there. The officer accuses Furle, the mayor, of treason and puts a pistol on his desk. Mr. Mayor, I think you ought to carry out the sentence yourself. Otherwise, I will be forced to do so. And then the mayor responds, if you do as you intend, you can be sure you will not leave here alive, answers the mayor. The officer looks out the window. By now, a considerable crowd of townspeople has gathered in the front of the mayor's office. After a moment's silence, the officer takes the pistol off the desk and leaves. Soon, the SS men abandon Kupferberg. And I thought that was just, here's the moment where, what it means not to be a bystander during the war, comes to the surface and really says everything about this community that is bigger than it's just separate from history and that's maybe a very defining characteristic of the town. I mean, of course, there are people who go off to war and don't come back, but they're all personal stories, and then there's the moment where we left off, where the Red Army sweeps in and they become part of the phenomenon of mass rapes and looting and relocation and displacement and all the things that happened that we read about in 1945 in Jabokovska's work.
I mean, I think that is an excellent scene, and it is a scene that shows the town's, in a sense, its indifference to being politicized and its indifference to being any sort of, the town has lost so many men, it's lost so many things, and it's just not going to put up with it anymore because it's a reasonable town. It's a town where beer is at the top of the list. I mean, these are things that people enjoy. But I also think that, yes, that is a wonderful grace note. But then we have history moving on, and history really does touch Kupferberg when it turns into Miedzianka. Once it becomes Polonized, it is not Polonized, it is part of the Soviet bloc. But what's interesting for me is that then Springer goes out and he's already focusing on the different characters who are moving in and how they're coming from the east to come to Miedzianka and to work. And those are the people that are people working in the mines, people who then eventually end up working in the brewery, and he knows all their names. They are given first and last names, and they are the players in this next part. And he talks about their lives, but when he has these very reportage-like chapters where it is one quote after another to talk about what it was like to be there under the Soviets, but particularly what it was like to be in the uranium mines, then he doesn't ascribe anything to anybody. But even there, there's a certain amount of, as you say, there's a certain amount of common sense. There's a certain amount of decency that he can find even in the descriptions, the townspeople descriptions, the new townspeople's descriptions of the Russians. And if I can quote from one of those, this is about the uranium mine. The Russian overseers and machine operators working down the pit were greatly superior to the Poles. Once, one of them told me, and the me is not identified, in confidence, not to sit on the canisters of spoil or anywhere the Geiger counter could creak. They also advised me to go up top when I was on break and not have breakfast until then, and never to drink the water in the mine. Uranium had a peculiar smell, and the Russians and the foreman knew how to use that to find a vein. They'd walk into a drift with their lamp and sniff. The uranium reeked like something decomposing in water. It stank like a corpse when we found a vein. There was so much radiation in the pit that the miners' watches stopped, but no one complained. One man said when he was drunk, he knew why his face stung after work. Then they beat him to death and threw his body into a ditch. It was all well thought out. The Russians were betting no one would survive the conditions in the mine, and that would be the end of their Miedzianka problem. But they miscalculated. If they'd known that then, they certainly wouldn't have left us here. We would have been left underground long ago. But other sort of snippets of these interviews show people telling, they may be tall tales, they may be true. You never know. I mean, Cotton happened, other things happened, but they'll say that pond is filled with miners' bodies, or there's a separate underground part of the mine that was basically it was blocked off, and that is full of dead miners' bodies, people who were seen as threats to the new Stalinist state of Poland. But it's interesting now. You have more and more first-person accounts that are being included, different voices coming in. Sort of, it's not Alexievich like that, but it is people testifying.
It's what struck me about that is that so far you've been like kind of on the margins, and the war has been moving around, and then all of a sudden you realize this little place that you've never heard of is absolutely at the center of the Cold War. These are the invisible victims of the Cold War, and you might not even notice it while you're reading, right? You've been reading along, and you've been in the 30 Years War, and you've and the brewery, and then all of a sudden you're in the mine back again, but now you're looking for uranium instead of copper, and then wait a minute, these are Soviets, and then there's this surveillance society, and people are people are being killed if they seem to know too much, or and it's the thing that everybody knows but nobody talks about. That's another element of it, and it's actually what I mean. You might not notice it. I mean, I don't think it really hit me until like a week or two after I'd read the book that that this is like at the center of the 20th century in a way that it took a while to sink in.
Yes. I mean, and it only happened for a short time. It was from 1948 to 1952, and then they had already exhausted whatever they could harvest of the uranium, and then, I mean, and this is something that it seems to me Springer underscores, that it is the uranium mining that truly is the death knell for the town. So he says there is a summer practicum for these geological students who come from the University of Warsaw, and they're being taught by a Russian who's actually a nice guy, and then they find an old miner, Mr. Kot, who takes several of them under to show them all of the uranium mines. And he shows them, well, here is where you can get into this man's house. Here's where you can get into the pharmacist's shop. Here is where you can get into another person's home, so that you know that all of these buildings are resting on a shaft where the supports are not very sturdy. And so you see that this last rape of the land, this exploitation by the Soviets for bombs, essentially for atomic bombs, is what was the way in which the town was completely undermined. Sorry for the pun, but I couldn't help it.
But it is. I mean, that is the story, that it's ultimately the uranium mining that does it in. The uranium mining is kind of the whole radiation story is what I think connects these two works that we have on the agenda today. It's almost as if radiation is a chronotope, a literary chronotope unto itself, right? I mean, there's this moment where there's people get radiation sickness and they die suddenly, and then there are these long-term effects that bring the story into the future. And the other work that we wanted to look at today was Katarzyna Boni's Ganbare, or as people also spell it Ganbate, Workshops on Dying, which is about the Fukushima disaster of 2011, starting with the earthquake and the tsunami, and then the partial meltdown of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. It's It also involves a village that disappears, Itate. Maybe more than one village that disappears. One of the towns very close to the nuclear plant. Except what happens in Kupferberg and in which becomes Miedzianka, is that that's a very long and slow decline, whereas here we have a very sudden attack of the tsunami that causes this disaster, which is followed by a long consequence as a result of the the loss that happens during the tsunami and the release of radiation from the nuclear plant. Um, so how the two authors? I mean, they're kind of two generations professionally, but they're actually the same age, aren't they?
Yes, yes. Katarzyna Boni was born in 1982 as well, so she's 39. Katarzyna Boni majored in cultural studies at the University of Warsaw, and she also studied social psychology at the Higher School of Social Psychology. And she also, I mean, Springer was somebody who came on board at the Institut of Reportages as a teacher, but he was not somebody who went through a reportage school. He was somebody who learned as a journalist. He was first a photographer and then a journalist. And I think one of the ironies is that there are no pictures in Miedzianka in the disappearance of a town. But Boni was someone who was always attracted to Asia and was always attracted to Japanese culture. And she spent 2 years working there this was several years after 2011. And she relied on translators. She relied on other people to help her find good interviews. It's in many ways, both of them are wonderful books, but this book is richer because so many people helped her and collaborated, and her sources then sort of proliferated. She had sources from those who were battling radioactivity to others who were talking about what you can still find in the sea, in northern Japan. So, and what I find fascinating is her book is divided into two parts, and she brings in World War II and the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki suddenly. I mean, actually, she begins this part with a chapter called The Shadow, which is all about Godzilla. Godzilla casts his shadow on the beach, and he is a creature who lives off of radiation. And she is somewhat playful in this because she's talking about Godzilla and all of his movies and all of his appearances and all of his deaths, but he always comes back because he cannot be put to death. He can never be killed. And so he comes back, and each time he comes back with more power. So it is, as she says, kind of an analogy for the nuclear age, that you bomb, and then you get a bigger bomb, and then you get a bigger bomb. But Godzilla is someone we can play with because he is just one of these creatures. And there are many, many creatures in Katarzyna Boni's book. But then what I have to say, my favorite chapter in this book is Kampai, which means a toast to someone. And this is where she manages to bring in World War II and the bombs and those who survived all in one piece. And she is with a group of 70 and 80-year-olds in some restaurant that serves a wide array of sake and different hors d'oeuvres. And they begin with the anesthetic of this food and drink. They begin to tell her, this guest from Poland, who they assume knows nothing, they are able to talk about their experiences in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And if I could quote from this,
yes, please.
This is wonderful because it shifts from them being foodies to survivors, and they can't unlink the two because it's very important for them to do it as a part of a community and part of telling her while they're hosting her of what pleases them and what horrifies them. Oh, good, the waiter, let's order some appetizers. So what if you've already eaten dinner? Kasha-san, you will have the full sake experience. Deep fried tofu, fried seaweed, ginkgo nuts, squid tempura. What else have we got? Oh, some pickles, of course. Ah, yes, and please give us sake served in a tokuri, not in a bottle. Kasha-san, you don't know what a tokuri is? Well, it's that belly-shaped pot for sake. Do you know that the hole in the neck of the pot has to be as big as your pinky? Only then do you hear the pleasing tok, tok, tok sound when you pour the sake into your cup. I remember much more, my friends. Just give me some more of that one from Nagano. It smells of the pine forest and rain. I was 20 years old, working in a weapons factory hidden in a tunnel near Nagasaki, exactly 2.2 kilometers away from the hypocenter. And all of these people talk about how far away they were from the hypocenter. That's very important. The tin walls shook. The factory was located outside of the city in the hills. I stepped outside. Rice fields were burning. 2 women were lying by the side of the road. They could not open their eyes. That's how swollen their eyelids were. They kept on saying that they were cold. Yes, people complained of cold. I remember that well. Kasha-san, wouldn't you like some more sushi? We didn't order too much. And they were thirsty. This is all done without a break. And they were thirsty. A pleading choir of voices was in the air over Hiroshima, calling, water, water. But with water or without it, they would have died anyway. There was nothing more that could have saved them. I remember one more thing, hot asphalt. I was crossing a bridge 4 hours after the explosion, and the soles of my feet were totally burned. In the hypocenter itself, the temperature was so high that the only thing left of people were shadows on stones.
It's a moment when we're back in that phase of Maurealism, the little realism that we talked about in our last episode about Reportage, where she's gone completely into first person, and she's there because the speaker is addressing a you, and she is the you, but she is not there. She's totally erased herself from, or at least created that illusion in that moment. Something that it's all. I mean, it's a work that has like quite a varied number of narrative styles. I mean, there's there's that. There's a period, a phase of straight reportage where we're getting like the minute by minute account of the tsunami landing and the earthquake and the seismic results. There are inserted texts like the survival kit, which I loved. I mean, I might need it myself, that we have it one day. So I'll bookmark it in case I need a survival kit. There's and then there are like these sections where she's, they're really mythological. They're about ghosts and demons. And then it becomes transformed. Like once we start, so first we get, kind of folklore, Japanese folklore about, various kinds of Japanese legends. And then there's this wonderful chapter called, or, frightening chapter called The New Bestiary, where the new demons are cesium-137, cesium-134, strontium-90, and all of those things. And and she recognizes that, these are both narratives, and one beast has taken the place of, the other beasts, the old beasts.
Yes. I mean, I think Boni also does not, I mean, as I said before, I was surprised that Springer did not have any photographs in his, because he is a photographer. He had no photographs, but though he has 2 chapters that talk about him viewing photographs of Kupferberg and saying what he would do for the kids in those photographs. But he does not include any photographs. And I wonder if he's said in various interviews that he felt that his photography was very strong, and when he started writing, he had to exclude photography because he couldn't be both. And maybe that's what happened in this book, but I would sure like some photographs. Anyway, and Boni does not include any photographs. And I was wondering about this. It might have been a question of rights of getting things, because there were so many photographs taken of what happened during the tsunami and what happened after the tsunami, that there were just sticks all over the ground or nothing where your house was. It was complete devastation. And so perhaps she couldn't get the rights. But also, as you said, David, I think there are so many cases where she, as someone who is very much attuned to social psychology, is talking so much about the inner life and beliefs of people in northern Japan. And it may be different, certainly in different big cities, but that they believe in certain kinds of ghosts. They believe what kind of ghost you will become depending on what you've done in life or what has happened to you. She talks about these ghosts that I can remember from various animated films, but again, one that has a head that stretches out from its body, and then it can, swipe a newborn and eat it. I mean, these are things that people believe in. They talk about what people dream, and people who, like a young man dreams of coming across one person after another whose eyes and nose and mouth are gone. And this is not from radiation. This is from the tsunami. These are dreams that are horrifying people. And there's also talk about people who are possessed and need to go to monks to be exorcised. And the exorcism is not sort of like a Catholic exorcism. It's a very gentle, let's get these people out of you and have them come to the light. So she's dealing with a lot of inner phenomena, people feel maybe are possessed, but again, she leaves that in the realm of what these people believe. She's not there to judge or to say this is all nonsense.
The ghosts seem like household ghosts, right? I mean, that there's the wonderful character of Kaneta, the monk who has his cafe, and which he calls the monk's cafe, but the word monku in Japanese also means to complain. So they come and they sit and they complain, and he offers them an ear, and then he finds very practical solutions to their problems. Oh, well, you need to exercise this spirit, so we will, say the appropriate blessing for that, for that spirit, and then and that will resolve your problem. Or sometimes it's, something very much more psychological, just having to do with, giving them advice, or or having them think, in a clearer way about what their problem is. And
what we need in the United States.
That.
What we need in the United States are more we need Japanese monks here. We really do. I mean, that's extremely important because they cross the border between counseling to the other world. I would like to be exorcised by a Japanese monk, really.
And he certainly, he thinks, he's a very human kind of character. I mean, he says, I can't solve all of their problems. There are too many of them. Some of them are not in my sphere of influence, and he's very aware of that. He doesn't seem like he's in some distant realm, or living in his head, or some spiritual world or something like that. He's a very down to earth person.
Yes. I think that's the cafe of camp. The cafe, the sort of food truck cafes that they set up all through northern Japan to get people to complain, but also to write down their memories of their loved ones. So they give them a kind of a tablet that they can write on, and then they eventually are able to do that. Or there's another case, I don't think this is run by monks, but they show films that show basically tear-jerking scenes. They're not great movies, but tear-jerking scenes that allow people to cry. They cry about what's going on in the movie, but it allows them to cry for everything that has happened. And that's so ingenious. And then I don't know if you want to go on to what would be the end piece.
About that end piece, this is about the subtitle, right? Workshops on Dying, which there are like kind of two phases of that, aren't there? Right? I mean, there's this one phase, which is something that, we get junk mail about every day, which is estate planning and funeral planning. And this chapter is called Death in Tokyo, which I thought was another great title. But then there's that last phase, which is workshops in dying, which is the actual subtitle. subtitle, which is struck me as a much more subtle and interesting thing, and maybe it's led by another Japanese monk, and it's perhaps more particular to Japanese culture than to the commercial culture that she identifies in Tokyo.
Yes, yes. And I wanted to say one thing to sort of back up and look at her entire, what is her professed purpose in writing this? And I said this in the last encounter with Reportage, is that she found in Japan a place where people had to deal with the most onerous conditions and the most onerous disaster. And she wants to know how they coped or how they didn't cope, who helped them, what were helpful strategies, what happened to them. She wants to know all of those things. And she wants them as a kind of template for the world and how one can deal with this, because Boni is someone also who is writing a lot now about climate change and the climate crisis. And she thinks that we are living with the destruction of the world as we know it, and we have to live in it. And she writes in one of the few translated pieces that she has done, is that we need to get together and talk about this. We need this. We're all terribly frightened and we're paralyzed. We're trying to use fewer plastic bags, etc. But we really need to get together and talk about this and talk about what we can do. And so at the end of Ganbare or Gambata, and with the workshops on the dying, I found out that these may have originated in the United States in hospice care, but having a Japanese monk do them, I think, is a great idea. But it is a wonderful way to end this, because again, going back to her sort of social psychology, what she wants to help people to understand what their life is about through realizing what it will be to die, what they have to give up. The way in which this is done, these workshops to accustom you to dying, is that you're given 20 cards, and they're in 4 different colors. So you have 5 cards in different colors, and they are about things that you like, about places that you like, about people that you like, and about activities you like, which can be everything from, kind of sports you like, to doing work you like, to whatever. So you have these cards, and then you lie down and you listen to a story that tells you that you have, the stories can be changed. And I know that Boni is now conducting these kinds of workshops in Poland.
But these would be called guided meditations, I think.
Yes, but really terrible meditations. I mean, guided meditation towards you dying. So it's saying, in the case that is cited in the book, it's about you getting cancer, and the cancer is galloping cancer, and you have different phases. And at each phase, then the monk will stop and say, now throw away 1 card. And then at another point where things are looking up, throw away 2 cards. So you have to choose what you would jettison at that point. And then you finally come to the last card, which is when you are at peace, the pain is no more, but you can't really connect with anybody because you have too much morphine in you. You are too doped up, and you need to let go of the last card. And this is what she writes about this, which is very interesting. Over the last 2 years, more than 1,000 people have died at the workshops of dying led by the Japanese monk Tetsuya Urakami, a monk from the temple in Yokohama. Some have even died as many as 4 times. The hardest thing to do is crumple up and throw away people. That's why a person who is dying tends to fold the cards with the names of loved ones in half and gently set them on the ground. For older people, children are most important. Younger people choose their parents, mothers more so than fathers. Then again, some people leave their glasses for the end. They can't see anything without them, or their computer because it holds their entire life in its memory. Others go with marriage, although they're single, and put it down on the red card just because they couldn't think of anything else. Men who had chosen their girlfriends think of proposing, while people who had left their fathers for last and whom they hadn't seen in a long time get in their cars to go see them. Do you feel that you're still breathing? The monk asks us. You did not die. That was not your last breath. So what will you do with your life? And what will you do with the 20 treasures that are most important to you?
It's a powerful ending. And it's one that asks people to do something, right? I mean, and that's it makes it more than just a report on something that happened.
One other thing I wanted to point out about both Springer and Boni, they're very different kinds of writers, and they pursue different topics. Ganbare was Boni's first solo book. She had done a book with Wojciech Tochman, who is a master of what I would call really straight reportage on Syrian refugees in Jordan, called Kontener or Container. And then she has done her third book that has come out is Oroville. It came out in 2020, and there she goes to an Indian commune in South India, where they are saying that dreams can help shape a better reality and that they can build a new utopia. And so she basically checks it out and sees how does it work, or what are its flaws, or what are its good attributes. But what's fascinating to me is that both Boni and Springer have moved on. I mean, they still are writing, but they have moved on to bring what they do in their books into real practice. So, for example, Filip Springer, along with Pavel Novak, who was, as he says, the Dobry Duch, the good spirit who helped him find things about Kupferberg and lives near Miedzianka. He lives in Jelenia Góra, I think. He has a festival in Miedzianka in the last days of August. And prominent writers come to this festival, and people read, people talk. Nobody brings their cell phones. Nobody brings their computers. There are no screens. In fact, one of the people who went to it just because they heard that it was fabulous said it was like a scene out of Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, because there were just books. Books were the path to freedom. And the sound of the leaves that people were walking on mixed with the flipping of pages. So it was this wonderful thing. Of course, it's also become this booming center of activities. So now there are people who come and give talks, like Jabalkovska came. I know that Tokarczuk has come and given talks there. I know that also there are writing workshops, there are yoga workshops, and even Boni has given a workshop on dying at Miedzianka. And so Springer and Novak are continuing to offer this. I don't think they did it during the pandemic, but now Miedzianka is so much on the map, and there's a new brewery. And so while he says at the end of the story of a disappearance, the history of a disappearance of a town, he says, I don't have to go to Miedzianka anymore. Well, Miedzianka needs him, and he goes there. Now, Boni, as I said, she's not only conducting these workshops, and she does them now online. She says she's had 800 people that she's ushered through these passages where they figure out what's most important. But she is in the process of raising money for another thing that she mentions in her book, and that is a wind telephone. There was one man who decided after the tsunami, after the loss of so much life, and he had lost a cousin I believe in the tsunami. He set up a telephone booth with a rotary phone, and the cord just dangles down into the booth, and you can go and talk to the loved one who has died. And sometimes, believe it or not, you might hear an answer because you're talking and talking and talking. And so many people have found this therapeutic that Boni decided that they needed something like this in Warsaw. So they are in the process of raising money to build a wind telephone not far from the botanical garden of the University of Warsaw. And it's in the place where Jabalkovska wrote about how there were Finnish houses that were built right after the war where people lived. So it's a beautiful space. It's a lot of greenery, a lot of plants, and then they'll have this phone booth that people can use.
That's wonderful. So, since we talked in our last episode at the end about the program at Duke and Slavic, why don't we conclude this one on tell me about this book about reportage that you're writing. I mean, where's it going? Where's this next project? Because that's not a subject that I think you've written about extensively before or at all, perhaps.
No. What I've been doing, I've always been interested in it, and I was interested in what my very first book was about. Nadezhda Mandelstam and Lydia Chukovskaya, and about what they, it was all nonfiction. It was all very, very interesting, memoirs and nonfiction. And I would like, problem is I like too many of them, but I've been devoting myself to writing reviews so that those who are not in the field will go and get this Polish reportage book that has been translated. But what I would love to do is something like still digging in Silesia. So I would look at different reportage books that deal in different ways with these recovered territories and the tangle of Polish, German, Soviet, and Silesian history in that period. On the other hand, then I say, well, what am I going to do about Katarzyna Boni, whose work I love? I think she is so creative and so astute in her choices and so diverse in her choices. She goes out on a limb in different ways. So where do I put her? So help me, David. What do you think the world needs?
That is a good question. I mean, it's something that I'm working on myself, all the time, and it depends on what we have to offer, what's available in translation. But some of what we should be discussing, I suppose, is work that hasn't been translated yet. So and that should be translated, and that I think it may be our program. We're going to try to do a little more of that in the coming year, since our show has been continued in that way, and maybe that's what's going to happen in your book too. I mean, maybe it's going to come down to Silesia, since you've been working so much on Silesia, and Boni will become some separate article or something like that, or maybe it will become something about. What I thought you were doing when we were discussing these was about the mentor and mentee relationships. So I thought that maybe that was a theme. Is that a theme, or is that not a theme?
No, well, it depends. It depends on the person. I think that Boni is very different from Tochman. I think she learned a lot from him. I think Springer has been, and this is something that I had suggested when we, again, it hasn't been translated, but Springer was the mentor of Dorota Brącz, who has written about the way Silesian houses were made, the kind of bricks that were made, and you had the imprint of hands, and they clinked in a certain way. And so she's talking about a whole way of life that has been lost. And it was lost because, again, the Silesians got caught in different ways during World War II. Some of them were inducted into the Wehrmacht, others went and hid in the forest. Once the Soviet army arrived, it was really difficult. But so you do have mentors and mentees. I want people to know too how reportage has developed since Kapuscinski, because that's what most people know. I mean, Kapuscinski is wonderful, but there are so many other people going in different ways. And what excites me is people like Boni, women who are going overseas and doing this kind of work, which had normally been seen as a male purview. I mean, because it was something that women traveling alone, it was difficult. Now it's not so difficult. And the people are, and she found a whole group of volunteers who helped her translate. It was just, she got a wonderful community there. So I don't know. I have no idea.
I think what the book will capture is like the tremendous energy behind Polish reportage. I mean, I think that
Yes.
that's what's really exciting now. That's the happening genre in Poland, and I think what we're both trying to do is make people more aware of it. So.
Yes.
So thank you so much for being on the program again, and I hope it won't be too long until you're back again, and maybe we'll discuss more reportage or whatever you're working on by then.
Thank you so much, David. It's been a real pleasure to do both of these episodes. And reportage, read reportage. It's great.
Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to receive notifications about new videos from the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. Go to the Polish Cultural Institute's website, linked in the description below, to see the full schedule of upcoming episodes. I'd like to thank all the people who helped make this series possible. Our sponsor, the Polish Cultural Institute, New York, directed by Robert Czaniawski. Bartek Remisko, head of Humanities and Literature at the Polish Cultural Institute, New York, suggested this series and acts as our executive producer. My fellow producer, Natalia Iudin, handles all the video editing, technical, and aesthetic aspects of this production. Claudia Ofłona-Draber, head of communications at the Polish Cultural Institute, New York, keeps us all informed about upcoming episodes of Encounters with Polish Literature and of other events organized by the Polish Cultural Institute, New York. Thank you all for listening and reading along with us. Let's meet again in a month, when we'll be talking about yet another Polish Nobel Prize winner and one of Poland's most popular poets internationally, Wisława Szymborska, with her main English language translator, Claire Kavanaugh from Northwestern University. See you then.